We're on the last page of this Hakdama, and that's page Yudal. And we're up to section Bays, which is called Ubrin. Do you see that? It's like the fourth paragraph on the page. Kedusha ala Ubrin. Until now we've been speaking about a Vlad that's already born, and the Vlad Kodshim we derive from different sukkim has the status of the mother, which is Lemizbeach, it's Hakrav Lemizbeach, with certain Drabanans and Xeros and so forth. But what about the Uber itself? Does the Uber in its mother's womb have the status of Hegdish? Nechluhu b'Gemara bar Pada v'Rabbi Yochanan im Kedusha chala al ha'ubrin. So we have a principle called Uber Yerech Imo, and the Uber is a limb of the mother's body. And within that context, we should assume that when he was Magdish the mother, that Maisak Dosha that generates Kedusha Lemizbeach is chal on the entire entity of the mother, which includes every limb of her body, and the Uber is like a limb of her body. Or do we say no? That the Uber separates itself as an independent entity, although it's not alive yet, but it will become alive. And the maskon of the Gemara is that nechluku rak betam b'mei balas mu. Okay, so we have two scenarios here. One scenario is where the mother is a tam, she has no mum, and in the other scenario is where the mother is a balas mum. In the case where the mother is a tam, or let's call it a tmima, right? Because the mother is simply feminine, so we have to use the grammatical feminine, tmima. She has no mum. And let's say the Vlad, we're not up to the stage of a Vlad, we're only talking about the Uber, but the Uber doesn't, as far as we know, doesn't have a mum. And we'll see about that case in a minute. Let's get to the real sticky case, that generated a machlokas, a lot of controversy. That's where the Uber is a tam, right? Where the Uber has no deficiencies, no blemishes, but the mother is a balas mum. I know. He breaks it down into smaller pieces, into categories. Im hikdish ubar shel behemas chulin. Okay, so now we're talking about not a case where he is magdish the mother, and the issue is whether or not that status of kedusha encompasses the uber, but rather he was magdish the uber. The mother is chulin, and he had no intention of being magdish the mother. Now, what's the situation physically of the mother? Does she lend herself to mizbeach? So now we're talking about case number one, where the mother is a tmima. Then l'divrei hakol chala kedusha ala ubar. There's nothing that blocks the hegdesh from being chala on the ubar. You and I would have said, well, maybe it's a davar shalom aliolam, but I can't possibly transfer ownership on something that doesn't exist yet. But the answer is one of two things. Either we see the uber as a davar shabali olam, albeit as an uber, but it's in existence. It's not that I'm being magdish something that hasn't yet come into the world. Or alternatively, we could say that Hegdesh is different than kinyanim. In kinyanim, where you need a das makne to effectuate a halos kinyan and transfer ownership, there's no such thing as acquiring ownership on something that doesn't exist. But in the case of Kedushas Mizbeach, that's not a matter of ownership. He's not transferring his ownership. He still remains the bailim over the Uber in this case. The question is whether there can be Kedusha Chal on the Uber. And if the mother's a Tmima, and the Uber is a Tamim, everybody agrees that you can be Magdish the Uber.
But you can't sell Uber.
I don't know. That you have to really see the Gemara of David Shalom Oliol, Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim. But you're right. I mean, let's be more comfortable with the first interpretation, namely that an Uber is a David Shalom Oliol. Again, it's a little problematic because you can't bring the Uber on the Mizbeach, and the whole essence of Hegdesh in the case of Kedusha Zevach is to be Magdish the Mizbeach. I don't know.
No, but you have to, so you wait. You have to wait, isn't it? So
correct.
So it doesn't matter. Once if you Magdish the Uber,
but I'm saying
that when it's born,
it's not Royal Akrova. So, in a sense, as far as Hegdesh is concerned, I mean, what is the significance of the Chalos Hegdesh now when it can't be brought on the Mizbeach? In a sense, vis-a-vis the Mizbeach, your Maisa HaKadosh is a Dom Shalom Aliyol. But again, leave it out. If you like the first approach, we'll go with the first approach. That it's a Dom Shalom Aliyol because the Uber is in his existence, and I can sell it, so why can't I be Magdish? The problem is going to be if the mother, the Bemis Chulin, is a Balas Mum. That's going to be a Machlokas, right? Im higdish ubar shel behemas balas mum nechleku. Here we have a contention. Lebar pada, according to the Shita Bar Pada, ein chala kedusha la ubar. Rabbi Yochanan chala. So intuitively, we're very comfortable with Rabbi Yochanan. Who cares about the status of the mother? I care about the status of the ubar. Why should the fact that the mother is a balas mum prevent the Hakdasha, the validity of the Hakdasha on the Uber? Right? Let's go back to the beginning. He says, Nechleku rak betam b'mei balas mum. There's no physical defect in the Uber. How do we know that? I don't know. We have to wait until the Uber is born to actually clarify that they didn't have ultrasound. You know, today, as I don't have to tell you this, they do surgery on an ubar in its embryonic stage. There are experts in that field. Well, while the mother's pregnant, they do an incision and they save the uber's life in its embryonic stage. It's amazing how far surgery has gone today. But in those days, I would assume that if we're defining the uber as a tam, it means we're going to find out later. And again, even though the mother is blemished, that doesn't mean that the uber is blemished. So you have a tam b'mei imo. The ima is a balas mum. So Rabbi Yochanan says you can be magdish the uber. Why is that any different than the case where even Bar Pada would agree that you can be magdish the uber if the mother is a bemis chulin that's a tmima? So why does the fact that, according to Bar Pada, that the mother is a balas mum, why does that inhibit the chalos hegdesh on the uber? Well, we're not being magdish the mother. The mother remains chulin. It's the uber that's the subject of that discussion.
So, yeah. That it's sort of
correct. There's a tug of war over here. On one end, Bar Pada doesn't deny that you can be magdish the uber as a separate entity, and that hegdish will be chal, meaning that we define the uber as an independent being. He wasn't magdish the mother; he was only magdish the uber, and Bar Pada recognizes. On the other hand, at the same time, there's a paradox here because the uber is Yerech Imo. And in what sense is uber Yerech Imo according to Bar Pada? In a sense that the status of the mother, which is Eino Riyui L'Mizbeach because she's a Balas Mum, now impacts and generates an impediment on the Hakdash of the uber. So again, it's not that Bar Pada disagrees fundamentally in the possibility of being Magdish uber. If the mother was a Bala, was a Tmima, that's in fact what you could do. But in a situation where the mother is a balas mum. Here, Bapana gets up and he objects. You cannot be magnish you cannot effectuate a kedushas mizbeach on the ubar because it's still considered yerach ima. It's what you call what do they call it in Freudian terms? You know, a schizophrenic of some sort, meaning it's like an androgynous kind of situation, meaning the status of the uber according to Bar Pada is like both here and there. It's independent and it lends itself to Akdosha Mizbeach, but on the other hand, it's still considered part of what? Part of the mother. Such that the mother's status is a balas mum, which makes her unfit for the Mizbeach, is going to cause an impediment and a barrier on being magdish the uber. Fascinating. Nisbar b'gemara shegavl chidas bar pada hainu dafka she'ein chal kedushas aguf ala uber v'kovakov kedushas uber kedushas damim chalabo kedushas damim. Beautiful. I mean, this is something I would have honestly. Again, I'm not trying to give myself credit, but I would have said this even without reading this. We're dealing with kedusha l'mizbeach. And in Kedusha Mizbeach, Balmum is Pasul Mizbeach. So therefore, the Psul of the mother, insofar as the Uber is defined as Yerachimo, is going to generate a Psul on is a Ma'akev on infatuating a Kedusha's Mizbeach on the Uber. But Bar is not denying that he can be Magdish the Uber as Kedusha's Bedek Habayis, as Kedusha's Domin. It's got a value on the shore. It could be a very high value. You know, it's interesting, when you talk about buying real estate here in Israel, I don't know how it is in the rest of the world. They're building a project. The project won't be built for 2 or 3 years. And they're charging you today what its value will be 3 years from now. So you say to the guy, you're not giving me a roof over my head. There's nothing built. It's, a couple of those tractors over there on the land. Why are you charging me such a sky-high price? And he says to you, but that's what it's going to be worth in 2 or 3 years down the line. Chutzpah. And they get away with it. There's such a demand for apartments, for flats, here in Israel. It's like there's no here. They get charged. You don't want to buy it, I'll sell it to somebody else. The law is supply and demand. So the Uber, I can sell the Uber at a pretty high price based on Israeli real estate, and because it's going to be born. That's called Kedusha's Damim.
Isn't the problem as well that if it's a Patasur male, a Zohar, and we don't, well, first of all, it's the mother, so how could she can't be poor as a Patas? And then we don't know what it's going to be, male or female. So
you're asking, let's say, according to Rabbi Yochanan, or if leaving out Rabbi Yochanan, let's say the mother is not a balas, she's a tamima. Everybody agrees, even Bar Pada, that you could be magdish the vlad. I guess the status of kedusha of vlad will be contingent on what gender it turns out to be.
But then the mother also has a problem because it's a female, not a zoppa. So they had a problem yesterday.
But again, we're really not focused here today on the mother. The mother is out of the picture. The mother is only out of the picture in the sense that she, as a balas mum, doesn't lend herself to hakdash. Limizbeach. All right. Nechleku rishona b'shitas bar pada shekedushas dom chalal ubar im liachar sheyulad yeh kadosh af b'kedushas aguf. Oh, this was the old migu business. 1 second. Mishum migu de nachtala kedushas domim nachtala kedushas aguf. We had a principle here. It was not universally accepted, unanimously accepted, but according to one shita, if you engender a kedusha, and right now there's an impediment which will be removed in the future. So as Basher Usham, as we say, the kedusha can only max out as the kedusha sadamim. But once we remove that impediment, then the kedusha damim automatically, it has inherent with it the potential for kedusha saguf for mizbeach. And once you remove that impediment, that kedusha will now complete itself and will express itself in a full-fledged kedusha, because the potential kedusha from the get-go that limited the kedusha was the fact that now it is right. It is a considered like a balas mum, but it's not really a balas mum. It's only a balas mum in a sense on a temporary basis because it's part of the mother. Once it emerges and stands on its own 4 feet, and it's not a balas mum, right? Because we're talking about an uber that is a tam. Then at that point, through the principle of migu, the kedushas damim should expand. It's a better word in English, but I don't remember what it is. Anyways, we'll use the word expand. We'll expand to become a kedushas aguf. That's called migu. Oh, what's the other possibility? I guess Machlokas Rashi Tosas. He says Shigamri achar leidoso eno kadosh elo ledom. So Tosas says that we're going to apply migu, but Rashi seems to imply, that's the way Reb Chaim Ozer understood the Rashi, she'ein bazeh migu denachta. Ubebira machlokas kosim shenetach gu in migu denachta chal rak bizman maisahe. The kachish is Rashi. So one second, I don't know if we have time for this, but let's see if we go back. What page? I think it was on page Ches. I don't know if you have that. We don't have good luck with archives yet. But and the case was that he was Magdish an Asham. He was Magdish in a Keva as an Asham. Right? And according to right, according to Shimon, right? So the Chacham say no, he cannot be poder in a kevali osh until it gets a mum. Why? Because migu de nachtalot kedushas nachtalot kedushas guf. What does that mean? Is magdish in a kevali osh. I think the migu tells you that that is a part of kedushas haguf that's engendered by the status of kedushas damin. So the Achiezer is saying that what that means, at least according to Rashi, is that when you magdish a nekeva for Asham, that Hakdosh itself generates a Kedushas Mizbeach. What does that mean, a Kedushas Mizbeach? I mean, he can't bring a nekeva as an Asham. But it means that it has that, remember we spoke about a theoretical or abstract conceptual Kedushas Mizbeach that cannot be implemented, and that's generated through migu by the kedushas dam, and the hegdesh is now chal in its full-fledged form as a kedushas mizbeach, kedushas guf. And the nafkamina is that you can't be poded. There's no right kedushas dam by definition lends itself to pidyon, but not in this case because of me. So the Achiezer is saying that can't apply to an umar because the umar, we're only going to be able to expand the hegdesh of the umar later on after it's born and becomes a separate entity, no longer connected by the umbilical cord, no longer connected to its mother. And the mother is a balas mum. So that kind of migu, says Rashi, that can't get off the ground. You can't create a new kedusha that didn't exist at the time of the Hakadosh. And in a case of an Akeva Li Asham, the Gemara is going to apply migu according to one Tana, and it's going to effectuate an impact on the Hakadosh itself. The Hakadosh of a Akeva Li Asham becomes a Hakadosha of Kedushas Haguf through migu, meaning you go through two stages. Stage number one is Kedushas Damim, but that Kedushas Damim engenders, it shoots off, so to speak, and creates a Kedushas Haguf, and that defines his Hakadosha. But if the Hakadosha was clearly Bishaito, a Kedushas Damim Hakadosha, then even if later on you remove the impediments, you can't yesh me'ayin generate spontaneous generation of a Kedushas Haguf. That's the shita of Rashi. Af l'shitas bar pada, Af l'shitas bar pada, shalochal kedushas haguf ala uber shel chulin, right, in the case of a balas mum, mikol makom, ubrim shel behemas korban, kedoshim kedushas haguf, l'man diyomar v'lodos kodshim b'mei imam heim kedosh. Right, so what did we say? We've said in the past that Vlad Kodshim is Karev L'Mizbeh, like the mother. What about Ubar of Kodshim? Does it have the same status as Vlados Kodshim? So let's argue from the negative perspective. You know what I mean? The devil's advocate. In a case of Vlados Kodshim, there's a separate Yalfusa that teaches me that the Vlad Kodshim has the status of Kedushas Mizbeh. It's Karev al Gabi Mizbeh. Notwithstanding the Gzeira of Mishuma, Megadol Adorim Adorim. Right, forget about that. That Gzeira Sakosim is only on a Vlad, not on an Uber.
But the blood wasn't enough.
What do you say?
But the blood wasn't enough.
Right, that's the Maskana. I'm trying to understand the Hava meaning. He's saying that according to the sheet of our Pada, that Ein Chal Kedushas Haguf ala Uber Shel Chulin, and that's only in the case of a Balas Mum. I don't know why he doesn't write. Right, we said that if the mother was a Tmima, is L'Divrei HaKol Chala Kedusha ala Uba. Didn't we say that? So he must be talking about the other case where Bar Pada disagrees because what? The status of the mother is that she's a Balas Mum, and therefore there's no Kedushas Haguf because of Uber Yerech Imo on the Uber. Right, the mother is a Behemas Kulin, and she's a Balas Mum, and somehow that status of Balas Mum is transferred over to the Uber insofar as the Uber is a Yerech Imo. But now, what happens now? A Vlad Kodesh, we're not talking about the Chulin now, we're talking about a Behemas Kodesh, now gives birth to a Vlad. You might have said, I'm trying to understand the Havabi, that since the Uber per se does not lend itself to Hakadosha, according to Bar Pada, so it shouldn't get the status of a Vlad Kodshim when it's born. In other words, it doesn't make any sense, again, according to the Havamina here, that there's a status change. The status change with birth. It was, as an Uber, it was not Kadosh B'Kedushas HaGuf, and now it's born, and all of a sudden, magically, without any new Hakdasha, it gets the status of Kedushas HaGuf. You follow what I mean? Because, you know, it will become a Vlad Kodshim, but now it's B'mei Imo, which is a Ma'akev, according to Bar Pada, in certain circumstances, from it being Kadosh B'Kedusha, B'Kedushas Mizbeach. So since, according to Bar Pada, we withhold the status of Kedushas Mizbeach to the Uvar, it's not logical to assume that all of a sudden it pops its head out and boom, magically it becomes a Vlad Kodshim with all the dinim of Vlad Kodshim. So he quotes here the Gemara, and the Gemara says, no, that's not true. That even though our Pada holds that in its embryonic stage, the Uber cannot be you cannot effectuate a chalos kedushas haguf on the ubar. Nevertheless, with its birth, it changes its status. It sheds its old status as an ubar, and it becomes now Vlad Kodshim, about concerning which the Torah says it's kadosh b'kedushas. Is that correct? I mean, does that make sense? So what was the status of the Uber before it was born? According to Bar Pada, it only had the status, we said, of Kedushas Damin. Now all of a sudden it's born. So we're going to say Panim Chadoshes Ba'olakan. It's like Kikot and Shenola Dami in Gerus, right? It's a brand new entity. Forget about its past. Until now it's Kodesh only with a limited Kedushas Damin. Now magically it takes on a new identity and it becomes Vlad Kodshim and it's Kodesh B'Kedushas Haguf L'Mizbeach. And that's the Gemara's conclusion that magically the birth itself generates a new status, a new entity on the Uber. Now it becomes a Vlad. I want to say Shalom Aleichem to Steve over here. I'm guessing that maybe the reason you're not here, Steve, is because of quarantine. Is that possible? Or
yeah, we just got back, so I think we're in quarantine for at least the 7 days now.
7 days. Wow. Because they changed the laws on you. And when you left, you were anticipating just
maybe
getting
3 days.
Maybe 3 days, even that. But now it became 7.
Right.
But at least you could do it at home.
That's the nice part.
Did you have to battle for that, or that was assumed?
No. Yeah, as soon as we were going through the airport, they said, you can go home. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So have a happy quarantine. Welcome to Steve. Okay, so we're going to stop here. And let's make a note of where we got up to. We're up to a paragraph that starts Af she'asu lahagdish. that's good. Another sugya called Mechusas Mal. But again, just to summarize the last bottom line of what we said, which is pretty radical, in my humble opinion. I don't know, David, you thought you're on the other side of the equation. You thought that it was partial. I thought it's not so partial. That during its status as an ubar, it is kedushas damim ga. That's as far as you can get. And yet, paradoxically, when it steps out on all fours and it's born, it has a new status called vlad kodshim. It sheds its old status, and now its kodshim is bad. And that's pretty magical. Okay, let me just take care of this technology.
If you have an uber in the mother, you shut the mother.